pals, non-binary pals, exciting video today. Actually, a very exciting video. I'm super stoked to show it to y'all. But before we get into that, if you'd love to join the lovely people right here that are all here on their own free will, they have a 100% choice to leave if they'd like to. I'm not keeping them here at all. You can totally do that. I stream on Twitch every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And if you'd love to join, it's completely free. It doesn't cost you any money. There will be a link in the description. Alrighty, so the title of the video that we're going to be talking about today is called The History of Obesity and Body Positivity. Now, this is coming from a smaller channel. The channel name is Daniel Torres, and he only has 5,208 subscribers. All right? And so this video, this is one that I've watched before, was very well done. I want to make it clear that just because we're watching it on the channel doesn't mean that I am at all saying that I am like co-signing everything that's been said, because there are some things that I'm going to disagree with. But I think all in all, it's a very well put together video, and I feel like he goes into a lot of really good information about the history of obesity, and not just being like, just stop eating. There you go, solved it, you know, which I think is just not as nuanced as it could be.
This is the Venus of Willendorf, a statuette of a large female figure dating back to 2500 BCE. This figurine is not unique. Primordial images of obese people as symbols of fertility, beauty, and worship can be found all around the world. It's not clear whether these were mere symbols or real people, but it is clear that in certain ancient cultures, obesity was something to behold.
So this is like something that you hear a lot, right? People that are like health at every size, they say, well, back in the day, it was actually a good thing to be obese because it was like a status symbol. Basically, it was like, if you can afford to eat to a point where you are gaining significant body fat, that showed that you were of a higher class and you could literally afford that much food, right? Because for so long, so many people, it was like you barely were surviving, right? At least that's what people think nowadays, right? I'm not a history major at all, but I'm just saying, like, that's the argument you hear a lot, right?
But it wasn't long until obesity became associated with negative health. The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates wrote about the negative effects of obesity way back in 500 BCE, and the Bible similarly took a harsh attitude towards overeating after gluttony was canonized as one of the 7 deadly sins. But this didn't
I remember that was one thing, like for me, growing up in the church a lot, I literally would have, I don't really go to church anymore, but I would have like leaders like come up to me and almost like make me feel bad for being the size that I was. Or they would, another thing that happened a lot to my mom was they would like say stuff to my mom about me, and they would be like, you are causing your son to sin because of his size. Right, that was something that we dealt with quite a bit, actually.
Stop obesity from being seen as a positive in cultures around the world. Fattening has been used as a practice everywhere from Afghanistan to Tahiti to make young men and women ready for marriage. And the famous 17th century artist Peter Paul Rubens painted beautiful and fat depictions of mythological goddesses. The history of obesity is long and complicated, with varying degrees of positive and negative representation. But to understand the modern reaction to obesity,
95% of the time, diets fail.
Come on, be fat with me.
And I don't have to prove that I'm healthy to anybody. Like,
diets don't work. So even if I wanted to be thinner, the chances of that happening, not really feasible.
It's useful to look.
Man, that is like a run through of all the people that we've talked about on this channel. It's kind of funny.
Look at the relationship obesity has with its counterpart, undernutrition.
So what it says right here, if you're just listening, it says Part 1, Undernutrition, Colonization, and Victorian Obesity.
During the Industrial Revolution, adult stature in the UK declined dramatically. New technologies and political developments led to the creation of a new class of people who worked in dangerous factories and packed into overcrowded cities, with little access to quality food, leading to widespread malnutrition. The pace of industrialization leveled out by the 19th century as there was generally enough factories and labor to meet demand. This created a problem for businesses.
So but basically what he's saying here was like, at this point, if you didn't have much money, right, you were almost malnourished. You didn't have you were underweight because you didn't have enough money to afford food, right? And then it started switching. That's kind of what I understood when I first watched it.
The market was just too small. They had the capacity to produce more and more, but not the demand to meet it. How do you solve this? Easy. You expand the market. First, they expanded the market domestically by slowly increasing wages to promote consumption within the working class. This allowed adult stature to recover after the initial dip as workers gained more consistent access to higher nutrition foods and the goods they themselves produced. Secondly, the British Empire forced its way into overseas markets like India, where they destroyed local industries and forced the local populations to export goods back to the UK.
Just like the good old days. I'm sorry.
Before being colonized, India had the largest economy in the world, while Britain held a mere 3% of the global output. After being ransacked, India's economy dipped and experienced a series of disastrous famines. Indian male height fell at a rate of 1.8 centimeters per century, while British incomes rose to 6 times that of Indian workers. This is the push-pull dynamic that we're going to be seeing again and again, undernutrition on one side and overnutrition on the other. Colonial expansion was a global process that created a worldwide network of exploitation. As colonized countries became export economies, sending their foods and goods abroad, their workers faced major food insecurity. As colonizer countries saw vast increases in wealth, their workers slowly went from being producers involved in the production of food to consumers. And as we became consumers, we got a little thicker. It's no coincidence.
I mean, it's literally called consumer, right? You are consuming. So you getting thick, you know, like this dude right here.
Evidence that the 19th century is also the one that marks the origins of modern dieting. William Banting, a formerly obese undertaker, wrote the first modern diet in which he described a diet resembling keto.
Bro, we're never going to get away from it.
By the turn of the century, dozens of diet books had been published as Victorian fascination with slimness grew. The changing standard of beauty was especially harsh on women. One Victorian woman wrote, "Alas, for the fat one, she gets into clothes that are skin tight and she draws in her corset string until it snaps and gives at every breath and sneeze, and even then she does not look graceful and pretty, for the fat, like secrets, will out, and it rolls over and around like the little bumps and humps in a pudding bag."
What is crazy about that is literally still happening now, right? With the waist trainers and all, like that literally still happens in 2021. It's like we've learned nothing.
Obese people found themselves the subjects of mockery, whether it was in Shakespearean plays or as the objects of fascination in circus freak shows. By the 1920s, the flapper girl's thin and flat physique had become the standard to strive for. The look was promoted in print advertisements, and young women sought out all kinds of fad diets and cosmetics to achieve the look. And even though beauty standards continued to change from the 1940s onward, one standard remained constant: don't be fat. While beauty standards continued
So it says part 2, obesity and the first wave.
developing, the end of World War II ushered in a new era of decolonization in the world, disrupting the state-sponsored exploitation of the centuries prior. But this didn't mean the cycle of undernutrition and overnutrition had ended. The global economy only found new enforcement mechanisms. Take, for example, the loans issued to formerly colonized nations by the International Monetary Fund. These came packaged with programs that opened up their economies to foreign investment to help stimulate their economy. Despite this supposed aid, these programs have been linked to widespread malnutrition and famine deaths in countries all over Africa and South America, mimicking the colonial process of over and undernutrition with a fresh coat of paint.
So obviously, like with this stuff, I don't know much about this. So like I don't want to say 100% believe everything that's being said here. Like do your own research, obviously. But if that is true, that's very interesting, right? I would just want to make it clear that again, like I don't know if this is all. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying, do your own research. Don't just like 100% believe everything that's being said.
While industrialized nations profited handsomely off of these policies and workers in these nations enjoyed an explosion in consumer buying power, the food they had access to also became worse through the increasingly complex global food business. A 2012 study on the links between global capitalism and obesity outlines how this worked. For example, the boom in soy agriculture in Brazil contributed to the cheaper and faster livestock raising in the US, processes that decreased the cost of US meat while also raising its fat content.
So what I'm understanding here is like, because food became more of a global thing that we were all doing together, a lot of the times the foods that were actually being, like exported and sent all around the world, the quality isn't the best. That's kind of what I'm understanding here. So yeah.
Though contributing to undernutrition in Brazil through increases in local food prices. Another example of this is in the production of coffee. The world drinks over 2.25 billion cups of coffee a day. But coffee is a very labor-intensive crop. Plantation workers across the world face severe malnourishment due to their minuscule wages, and their malnourishment feeds the global food industry both in direct ways like making its way into your sugary, calorie-dense Starbucks drink, but also in indirect ways. Coffee is a common additive in soft drinks, making them easier and more addictive to consume. And to top it off, coffee is commonly marketed as an easy way to boost productivity and change consumer behaviors in the same emerging markets they're harvested from, fully completing the cycle. This increase in cheap processed foods was a change that coincided with the rise of supermarkets and mass advertising, compelling Western consumers to consume at an ever-increasing rate, all while mistreating the larger members of its society. This was a bubble that was ready to burst.
It's interesting looking at like footage from back in the day, because I wonder like how hard, right, to if you were to go back in time, like especially with how used to like food and how easy it is to access food for us now, for most people, like how hard would it be for us to go back in time and like survive? I know that's a little extreme, but like how difficult would it be to get to a point where you're comfortable with how that situation was, right? Like I hate to break it, but like I know for me it'd probably be pretty difficult. Like
the 1960s saw a wave of massive global uprisings that saw students and workers erupting in protest against white supremacy, patriarchy, LGBT discrimination, capitalism, whatever permutation of exploitation you can find. The 1960s rebelled against it. And fat discrimination was no different. It all started with the 1967 Fat-In in New York's Central Park. The Fat-In consisted of 500 people marching, eating, and burning dieting books and pictures of the British model Twiggy. 2 years later, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, or NAFA, was founded, dedicated to improving the quality of life for fat people everywhere. Shortly after its founding, a radical sect of the group spun off, calling themselves the Fat Underground. Claiming that doctors were part of a cabal trying to commit genocide against fat people, the group was tiny, and aside from a few small actions, they quickly fizzled out. This was the first wave of fat activism, and regardless of what you think of fat activism today, I think it's hard to claim that the movement at large didn't have a valid point. Obese people face a never-ending torrent of micro and macroaggressions from the people around them. Obesity should be a conversation people have with their doctors, not nosy friends and relatives. And when it comes to the workplace, it's even worse. The majority of employers would choose applicants with a normal weight over equally qualified obese candidates. And since weight isn't a protected class, this is 100% legal. Even the more radical fat activists kind of had a point. It's hard to separate diet culture with the world's 1,000-year-long history of controlling women's bodies.
So this is like all of this stuff I'm fully for, right? And I totally understand. I think I myself have dealt with the stigma when I was overweight, right? Like I've talked about the stories of going to the doctor's office and how hard it was to find a job and all of that stuff. Like that's 100%. I agree that those things 100% we should figure that out, and we should try and make those things better. But that's not what's going on now, which we'll get into more. So it's not like I am fully against any sort of help for people that might be overweight, right? Or fat or obese, whatever word you want to use. Like, that's definitely not how I am. I'm like, let's figure stuff out to where you're not miserable where you are and you're not being treated poorly where you are, but also let's make it okay to want to change where you are and understand there is nothing wrong with wanting to change where you are. That's where I fall.
When you look at the grand scheme, it sure looks like the war on obesity is just another level used to enforce patriarchy. So I think saying fuck your beauty standards and choosing to fight fat discrimination and promoting a good quality of life for fat people is a noble goal, and most Americans would agree, at least partly. For example, public support for laws to limit weight discrimination in the workplace is at an all-time high, and according to a YouGov poll, the majority of Americans familiar with the body positivity movement tend to believe it's a good thing for society. But the fat activism of the 1970s is far removed from the fat activism of 2021. By the 70s, the obesity epidemic hadn't even started yet. BMI is slowly increasing around this time, but the epidemic proper won't start until 20 years from now.
That is such a crazy, that's so crazy to me. That it started before it was even an epidemic. Now, it's like you're more used to seeing someone that is fat or obese on the street than not, right? At least that's what it seems like in America.
So what happened in the 1990s that catapulted us into this? American anthropologist Sidney Wilfred Mintz argues that a key element of the changing global order during the 20th century was a loss of individual agency, which might sound a little conspiratorial, but according to this argument, commercial organizations have collectively learned to maximize profits through making consumers' decisions for them. Such decisions are made both at the behavioral level through advertising, price manipulations, and restriction of choice, and at the physiological level through the enhancement of addictive properties of foods. Mintz's work.
So what I'm understanding there is it's not just, what I like about this is that it's not saying that it's not at all personal choice, but it's not just personal choice, right? It's personal choice as well as the systems that are in place to make it harder basically for someone to make the right decision, right? Or the decision that would encourage weight loss.
Focuses on the rise of sugar as an additive in all kinds of foods. And while I'd love to go into detail, I think that's a topic for a separate video. For now, I want to take their argument and look at a case study on Mexico's changing relationship with food. Mexico trumped the United States in adult obesity rates. It's no coincidence that this occurred a mere 14 years after the North American Free Trade Agreement went into effect. After the deal was signed, Mexican markets were flooded with US corn and soy products. The number of...
So what's crazy about this is that some people in chat are actually bringing up food deserts, and I have my own theory, is because especially in America, obviously there are quite a bit of food deserts, but in Mexico, I bet you that situation is even worse, right? So a food desert is pretty much the only access to food you have is like going to corner stores. You don't really have access to a large supermarket that's going to have like rice and vegetables and produce and fruit and meat. It's like all you have access to for most of the week is the corner store that doesn't have any of that food, right? So your only choice is to go to those corner stores, right? And even if you do have access to a supermarket, a lot of times it's more expensive and you don't have the money to. So that's one of the biggest reasons that when people say being poor or being in poverty or being lower class also equals struggling with being fat, it's not because like people are just stupid if they're poor. It's because they don't have access to it. And then on top of that, I know the argument is going to be like, well, you can eat those foods and still lose weight. And I'm not going to say I disagree with that, but that is much, much more difficult than having access to high volume, low calorie foods like fruits and vegetables and all that stuff that will make losing weight much easier.
Distinct local breeds of maize that had been maintained by rural communities throughout the nation fell to the cheap monocultural corn of the north, creating mass displacement in small and indigenous farming communities and a rising poverty rate. Does this story sound familiar? Unlike India in the 19th century, Mexicans at large didn't suffer from undernutrition. Instead, cheap processed foods became commonplace in Mexican markets and households, with products like Coke being so readily available that it was cheaper and more common than water. Today, 1 in 4 children in Mexico are overweight, with the number jumping to 1 in 3 for teenagers. Borrowing from Mintz's analysis, it's easy to explain why this happened. At a macro level, our consumption habits are shaped by what's easiest, cheapest, and most available. And these are all determined by multi-billion-dollar industries and state powers far beyond any of our control. By prying open the gates of foreign markets, agribusiness has been able to destabilize foreign economies and cause obesity epidemics practically overnight. This loss of agency is at the heart of the issue, but it's not something you hear very often in mainstream discussions on obesity. Instead, most outlets tend to highlight our agency. The argument goes that it's the rise of cars, desk jobs, new forms of entertainment, and fast food joints that are causing the obesity epidemic. We've transitioned into a sedentary race of people, and so the antidote to obesity is usually choosing to walk more, buying a standing desk, parking a little bit farther from the store next time, and of course, eating healthier.
I understand why that is what people focus on, right? Because it's like if you're thinking about this just in like for yourself, it's like, what can I do to change where I am, right? And so the answer is all of those things that was brought up, right? Like being able to, eat a little bit less, try and move a little bit more, like all of these things, right? But if we're talking like that is fine for the person, right? That's what I did. But like if we're talking about the epidemic or the epidemic, not the pandemic. If we're talking about the epidemic, like to solve that, it's going to take more than just this person needs to work harder and that person needs to work harder and that person and that person and that person. Up and say that to millions and millions of people, right? It's going to be a little bit more nuanced than that, and there's going to be more to it, and that's what I feel like is being explained right here.
When individual actions are both the problem and the solution, it obfuscates the political nature of the question, it prevents us from pursuing the practical laws we can implement to stop it, and it opens a new market for the emerging industry ready to sell you silver bullet solutions. The dieting and fitness industry has grown steadily since the 19th century. It's estimated that the industry generates almost $100 billion in revenue every year, and it's not hard to see how. We're simultaneously conditioned to crave foods that make us overweight and to crave either rail thin or superheroic figures, which has created a cascade of body image and health issues. Yo-yo dieting, or losing and then regaining weight over and over, has been associated with increased risk of heart disease.
And the thing that's sad about this is that so much of the information from the health and fitness industry is so bad that it's literally not helping you, and in some cases it's hurting you more. So it's like you are not being forced, but you have all of these things that are making it super easy to eat, overeat, and all this stuff, and then now you are being marketed to from these people that are like, oh, I can help you lose weight, blah, 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 but they're giving you terrible information that doesn't actually result in lasting weight loss. And then on top of that, you are then dealing with people on the Health at Every Size movement saying it is impossible to lose weight, so you shouldn't even try, and if you try, you're going to fail. So it's like, what does someone do, right? Like, what do you do in that situation? It's really hard.
Eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia have increased dramatically since the 20th century, especially affecting young girls, and the use of performance-enhancing drugs in boys is a hidden yet serious issue. Kids younger and younger are dieting as a direct result from the pressures of society to conform to weight standards. We generate enough food to feed 10 billion people. And while people in the global core feed themselves to death, it's estimated that over 200 million people suffer severe hunger in Africa, moderate food insecurity affects a third of people in Latin America, and 500 million people are undernourished in Asia. Having a fit and healthy body has become a class issue. In countries like the United States, individuals living in the poorest communities are the most susceptible to obesity. This is a strange paradox. How can you be both poor and fat? This reality has lent credence to people who claim that global poverty isn't really that bad. I mean, if you can afford to be fat, you can't be that poor.
This is such a good point right here.
So let's untangle the paradox.
Because, I mean, that's something that you hear so much. Like, you're obviously not that poor if you can be fat. And, bro, I'm sorry, but that is like a third grade level understanding of the issue. Like, when I hear people say stuff like that, I'm like, you are choosing to be ignorant to this. You are choosing to not actually care. Oh, dude. Okay.
It starts to make sense once we reframe the issue, not as a question of under or over nutrition, but as one of malnutrition. Obesity, just like being underweight, is a state of malnutrition. And malnourishment is a condition the working class has long been used to. Just like in the era of colonization, this malnourishment is a result of the way businesses have dealt with the limits of the market.
So when I first heard that, I was like, oh, that's interesting, right? Obesity is a state of malnutrition. Now, again, he doesn't say undernutrition, malnutrition. So I just thought that was interesting.
At the end of the 20th century, agribusiness had developed a production capacity so large it could end world hunger overnight and still have a surplus. But again, there's the issue of the market size that limits how much of that can actually be consumed for a profit. So a bunch of that food goes to waste.
It's so sad. Like, that's so true too. I remember when I worked at Vaughn's, I worked in the meat department, and we would have, no joke, every day barrels. They would stay in the fridge, barrels filled with meat, like lunch meats, filled, right? That were just one day past expiration. And they literally, like, you couldn't give it away. You couldn't do anything. You had to cut it and like ruin it. Because you're not, like, they had to throw it away. That was the only thing that you were allowed to do. I just remember thinking, like, that is crazy. Like, you couldn't even, like, if you worked there, you couldn't even be like, oh, I'll just take that, right? Like, you couldn't do that either. It was like you could get in a lot of trouble if you were like, oh, I'll just, I'll take it. Like, I don't want it to go to waste. I'll take it myself and I'll eat it. You weren't allowed to do that either. It was like you had to throw it away. That was the only option. You couldn't give it away to a homeless person, anything like that. It was like, only option is to throw it away.
Unless you store that surplus in our bodies. Obesity is the solution to the limits of the market, achieving forever growing profits by exploiting our bodies.
So this is really interesting. So from what I'm understanding here is the issue, what he is saying, again, I'm not even saying that I necessarily agree with this, but it's like the issue is that we are making too much food, and so the way that we are storing that excess food is by feeding it to people, and that's what's causing obesity for a lot of people, right? That's a big part of the obesity epidemic. At least that's what I'm understanding in this video. Again, I'm not saying that I agree or disagree. I just think that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Expanding them to ravenous proportions. All of these factors I've outlined have created a disaster. As of 2016, almost 2 billion people were overweight, with 650 million of them being obese. Related conditions such as heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers have become the leading cause of preventable premature death. And today, most of the world's population live in countries where being overweight is a bigger cause of death than being underweight. These numbers are devastating, but there is a lot of things we can do. Agribusiness has been allowed to unleash an unprecedented level of harm because they're socializing the effects of their destruction. They don't have to pay for our health bill, but what if they did? By taxing them based on the level of unhealthy food they sell and diverting that to healthcare, or banning certain food products focusing on local food distribution chains so we don't have to add junk additives and preservatives to make food last a million years. These are all simple, common sense solutions to the obesity epidemic.
Now, I don't know too much about the politics of it all, but I feel like that would, I feel like that's like this is an easy way when I'm like, I think that there's a lot of people that would have a problem with that. I wish it was that easy. You'd be like, yeah, if you make unhealthy food, you're taxed more and you got to pay for all the medical bills. That'd be great, but I just don't think it's going to be that simple.
And that's why instead of this, we get bullshit like Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign, focused on getting kids to live more healthy and active lifestyles. It's like fighting climate change by creating a recycling program. It's just not getting to the root of the problem. Of course, that's by design when the government serves the interest of corporations, but this isn't the video for that. Where obesity differs from something like climate change, though, is that the only person who determines what you put in your body is you. While no matter how much you reduce your carbon footprint, the environment will continue to be destroyed, changing your food and health habits will let you change your body. But not everyone agrees with that sentiment. We've lost the war on obesity. Fighting fat hasn't made the fat go away, and being thinner, even if we knew how to successfully accomplish it, will not necessarily make us healthier or happier. The war on obesity has taken its toll. Health at every size is the new peace movement. It helps us recognize that health outcomes. This is a blurb from a Health at Every Size website, and it sounds pretty good, right? It's the most mainstream and acceptable interpretation of the movement, and there's nothing I really disagree with. While there are more radical elements of the movement, making all kinds of weird, ridiculous claims, I don't think you can address a movement by singling out the more out there supporters. So we have to talk about body positivity and health at every size as most people think about it. And at the core of the movement is one point underlying everything.
What about your own health tech? We had a report very recently in this country saying it's a myth that you can be very overweight, obese, and be healthy. So do you worry about your weight? You've got young children.
I'm very active. I always tell people, like, I challenge anyone to keep up with a day in my life. I know that I'm healthy, but I also...
Fat and...
That's such a bad answer. I don't know, man. I'm sorry. Why... I don't know. Okay.
Healthy is the latest trend in the world of body positivity, popularized by fat activists like Tess Holliday. Is there actual science to merit the claim? I'll save us all a whole lot of time. No, not really. Study after study, meta-analysis after meta-analysis shows that long-term, obesity is just not compatible with health. Just like alcoholics can go years without any serious health problems, obese people can go a long time without facing lethal side effects. But we don't define health based on whether something kills you immediately. Being obese absolutely demolishes your quality of life, making simple things like moving your body and walking difficult as you get bigger and bigger.
This is all like exactly how I feel about the situation, right? If you are obese or you are fat or you are overweight, again, whatever term you like, does that mean you're a bad person? No. Does that mean I think any less of you? No. None of that. Does that mean that you are super unhealthy and that you're probably a ticking time bomb? No. But does it mean that in the future, that size, is that going to cause problems for you? Most likely, right? Like, does that mean that it's probably more difficult for you to get up a flight of stairs, or it's more difficult for you to like walk around the amusement park with your family or play with your children? Probably, right? And will it only get more difficult as you get older? Yeah, probably. And so should it be encouraged to make a change if that's something that you want to do? Yeah, probably, right? That's how I feel.
And if you stay obese for long enough, you're essentially guaranteeing an early death. A common line for fat activists is that if being fat is so bad, so is yo-yo dieting. Promoting weight loss, therefore, is bad because most people end up gaining weight after weight loss after 5 years. Which, on the face of it, yeah, is true. But that only demonstrates that 1, we need systemic changes to fight obesity, and 2, that doesn't give us free reign to pretend obesity is all fine and good. Obesity is...
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like, okay, yeah, yo-yo dieting is not the best. But also, just because yo-yo dieting is also bad doesn't mean that obesity is now all of a sudden a good thing.
A destructive condition. It's something no one should try to be. Just like no one should try to be a chain smoker. I genuinely think it's criminal that there's charlatans and grifters selling this disease as a lifestyle and trendy movement when they're profiting immensely off of it. Tess Holliday or Virgie Tovar don't care if you die at 40 from a heart attack because you're obese. They're getting paid. They're getting clicks, views. They don't give a fuck.
Bro. Facts. Facts. Let's be real. Come on.
Anyway, I was an obese kid. I lost it, became underweight, got to a normal size, then gained it again, and I'm trying to lose it now. So for anyone who's struggling with their weight or body image, I get it. I really do. If you're fat or obese watching this, you know, we've been duped. We've been had. We've been conditioned into an unhealthy lifestyle, primed to become obese over our entire lives. Frankly, it's a surprise more of us aren't obese. I think the most important thing to take away from fat acceptance is that you are valid at any size, but being obese is bad for you, and we do have the agency to get better, to live a healthier and longer life. It's easier said than done. I mean, everyone's case is different and everyone's gonna have different methods, and there's a lot of things I haven't talked about, like the role food insecurity plays in obesity and the intergenerational genetic effects. But in a world that's compelling you to destroy your body, I think it's revolutionary to take a stand for yourself and tell the world, no, I won't eat myself to death. And if we want to help others do the same, we need to consider our role in a wider social movement and what steps we can take to dismantle the systems and institutions that are harming the human body. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Please like, comment, subscribe.
So that's the video. I highly recommend y'all check out his channel. It will be linked down in the description. But yeah, like I said, I thought that was a really just well done video. Again, I'm not saying that I agree with everything that's being said here. And there's a lot of stuff that I don't fully understand myself. So I would recommend, like, you, if you're watching this, to do your own research and don't just like fully accept everything that's being said. But I do think that having more nuanced conversations about this stuff is important, instead of just being like, oh, you just need to lose weight, fatty. All right, see you later. Like, that's obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But again, great video. I'm glad we were able to check it out.